After my big effort last week to try and finish the repointing on the back wall, this week has seen a slight change in pace, with me needing to catch up on some things both here and off-site, which has meant a day away from work and the camera, and then back here for some finishing, tidying up and preparations, and then back to my main priority work for this month. So it was Tuesday when I was first back on site, armed with the cooler bag and plenty of water, and ready for working in more hot sun like last Friday. And the plan for the day was to return to the work on the back wall, where about a third of the wall still needed a final clean, which meant getting the generator and other things to the back, and then moving the scaffolding out from its more secure weekend point. With things set up, it was time for the overalls, mask, and a start on the work, where my plan was to initially work on the higher parts that I needed the scaffolding for. First, removing the excess mortar from the surface of the stones, which was from either my own repointing or from earlier work on the roof and the cornice, and then with the higher part of the wall brushed off, cleaning the stones and joints with the acid wash, before moving the scaffolding along and repeating the process. After finishing the first two sections, I was in need of a snack and a cold coffee. And after my short break, I was heading back to the wall when I saw what I think was a silver-washed fritillary, a very large and very beautiful butterfly. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to capture it on camera. With the work on the higher parts complete, the scaffolding could be moved away from the path. And then reviewing the shade on the wall, I decided I might have just enough time to finish the lower parts of the wall before being fully exposed to the sun in my overalls. As you can see from the moving shadow, it was gonna be close. After finishing just as the sun was on the wall, I was pleased to head inside briefly for a late lunch. And after a bit of a rest and without the overalls on, I then headed back outside for a bit of a clear up. With the ground cleared, I got the scaffolding set up for the next work. And with work on the back wall finished for now, especially on the corner by the path, I was able to make some adjustments to the temporary fences. Wednesday would start with a trip to the town down the hill where I needed to pick up some supplies, in particular a new bag of the colorant that I am using in the mortar mix. And having waited for a shop to open, I was on site a bit later than usual, where my initial priority was a refill of all my water deposits, which after a lot of mortar mixes and cleaning up were all running a bit low. I also needed to rearrange my pump and hose pipe setup and tape up a couple of holes in the added-on hose pipe. With a lot of water to draw up from the borehole, there would be time for other tasks, including some tidying up inside. With one deposit filled, it was time for a change to the setup, filling up the deposit next to the fence while pumping water from one deposit to the other one on the church side, which I can't directly fill from the borehole. While the water flowed, there was time for a drink, and then providing some surplus rebar column to a neighbour to help them repair some ground beneath some fences. Back on water filling, there was time to make the ground beneath the mixer a bit more level by removing some of the dried up waste. And with the deposit on the church side now full and ready for use later this week, I now needed to refill the deposit by the borehole, which gave me time to put one of the temporary drain pipes back in place, with there being a forecast for thunderstorms and rain for a couple of evenings this week. My original plan had been to get back to the repointing work, but I wasn't that keen to restart it in the middle of the day with the peak sun and temperatures. So I took the easier option of heading inside, starting some tidying up, and then having my lunch break. Before returning to clear the ground space on the extension side, where I will need to do some preparations for the next phase of floor work. With the floors cleared, I took another easy option and headed out for gasoline for my generator rather than start any more work outside. Back on site at my normal earlier time on Thursday morning, it was time to get back to the repointing work on the wall on the church side, which required a slightly different setup for the water and slightly longer transfers of my things. For the final preparations, I managed a more controlled wetting of the walls. And then it was time to transfer the mortar, with Rex kindly back on site to help with the morning's work. I knew that the top left-hand corner of this wall would be tricky to work on, but I had forgotten the cornice here was a bit bigger and had more of an overhang. So my scaffolding was not ideally placed, and the opening hour of work was a bit of a nightmare, with Rex having to put up with various curses from above. With Rex progressing well and the cornice section thankfully complete, it was time for the next mortar mix, returning to scrape and smooth out the new mortar before a mid-morning break under the shade of the tree.
Marty said she heard that there was supposed to be some heavy rain in parts of Kamlo here today. I don't know where. Down here.
Then we were back for a second session where some shade was starting to be needed. But my work was now at least a lot quicker and easier on the wall below the cornice. Rex was being kept company by a swallowtail butterfly, but when I tried to film it, it disappeared over the wall. With a good section complete, Rex's morning work was done. And I followed him down the path for the next mortar batch, combining it with my lunch break before heading back to the wall. The forecast for later on was for cloud and possibly rain, but by mid-afternoon I figured I still had enough time for one more batch of mortar, which I would need to finish the lower parts of this section of wall. About midway through this lower section, the cloud had rolled in, the wind was picking up, and thunder on the other side of the hills could be heard. So having raced the sun and shadow earlier in the week, I was now racing a storm and its rain. As I finished my work for the day, raindrops were falling, the thunder was getting nearer, and about an hour later, a big storm did pass through the area, providing some much needed rain. After the storm the evening before, Friday was a bit fresher, and parts of the ground were still wet as I looked to get set up as quickly as possible to get back to work. Which, although faster than usual, the next clip still needed accelerating. And with tools in place, the mortar transferred, the wall wetting complete, and the mortar lifted up, I could get on with the repointing. The cornice part of which would prove a lot easier than the day before. In the comments of the last video, a few people asked about the window grills on the back wall, and the upper window on this wall has the same design. At the moment, my future plans are to take them all off, as they feel a bit oppressive from the inside. But at this stage, I am leaving them on for the security they provide, which makes repointing around these windows a little trickier and means some additional work at a later date. By the end of the first batch of mortar, the sun was just starting to hit the wall and make for hot work, so I was glad for the break while the next mortar batch mixed. And then back on the wall, the shade sheet was a welcome addition. Although working under the higher platforms created some good shade as well. For the lower down section, shade solutions were a bit trickier, and it was also going to be tricky to balance the finishing lines of this section of wall with the remaining mortar supply. Although at this stage I was intending to mix some more after my next break. Well, I had been planning to do one more batch of mortar, but that's going to turn it into a very late evening. And I think I'm going to be better off taking my time with the plenty of tidying up that I've got to do and avoiding doing any more work on that side wall where the sun is very strong right now and I think I might boil. So I'm going to call it a day and call it a week. A shorter week and a shorter video than usual, but I have made reasonable progress on that sidewall. And next week I think I'm going to be back for a big push on the repointing of the outdoor walls. We'll just see how far I can get with it. I'll certainly be moving on to the front wall. I don't know if I'll finish it, but I might be giving it a go. So please do tune in again next week to see how I get on.